If you want to see a tragic preview, really, of the voter suppression and catastrophic disenfranchisement that we're going to see in the November election, look no further than yesterday in Georgia. Georgia, among some other states, had primary elections yesterday. And you may or may not even have heard that elections were going on in local elections, depending on what media sources you consume. You may not even have been aware that there were problems or that there were even elections yesterday, but there were. And this is really, it's really a crisis level situation where the United States looks much more like the developing countries that our right wing leaders often criticize based on what our elections looked like yesterday. We had people waiting in lines hours and hours long, outdoors in the heat, often wearing masks because we are still, by the way, dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, there were shortages of ballots, and this was all disproportionately in the minority precincts, parts of the state of Georgia where the population is majority minority, places that tend on average to vote more for Democrats than they tend to vote for Republicans. And at some point, I mean, how many times are we going to see the exact same story? And the answer is probably many, sadly, but we've been watching this for election cycle after election cycle. This happened back in Georgia, back in 2018 in Georgia. That was when then Secretary of State Brian Kemp, a Republican, was running for governor. And as Secretary of State, he oversaw his own election against Stacey Abrams to be governor of Georgia, ultimately won. Big surprise and widespread allegations of the exact same type of voter suppression, disenfranchisement, reduction of polling places in disproportionately minority and Democratic leaning areas. It's the same game. And the reason that Republicans are going to aggressively push this in Georgia is that Georgia is increasingly a contested state. Now, I don't want to, pretend like it's a battleground state in any real sense right now. Presidentially, for now, it's still a state that Trump is likely going to win modestly easily. He's up in the polls about 7 points right now in Georgia. He'll almost certainly win. But the point is, Georgia in local and state elections is increasingly purple. It's close enough for Trump that he's going to have to spend some money there, which is money he can't spend in two places. He's going to spend it there instead of somewhere else. Back in 2016, Donald Trump only won Georgia by 5 percentage points. In the 2012 election, Mitt Romney had defeated Barack Obama by 8 in Georgia. And again, it's the state and local races are maybe suggestive of what we might see in the future in Georgia, which is more of a centrist lean than a hard right lean. And Republicans are understandably very worried. So we saw a preview yesterday in Georgia of what we're going to see in a ton of places in the fall. This includes Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin. Really, it's like every contested battleground state that was important to Trump in 2016 that he can't really afford to lose without putting his reelection at risk. We are going to see this exact same thing. Now, of course, lots of Georgia voters, you'll be glad to know, had no problem at all voting yesterday. It's voters who disproportionately vote in overwhelmingly white precincts. And they were widely reporting, listen, I showed up and voted in 5 minutes. There was no line. What are people complaining about? And that's exactly the strategy. Make it really easy for voters that are statistically more likely to vote Republican to vote. Make it much more difficult for voters that at the aggregate, broad mathematical level are more likely to vote for Democrats. And it's the same betrayal of Georgia voters once again. This is election rigging. We have to stop using these softer terms like there were reports of isolated irregularities. Come on. There were delays voting in some precincts. Those are essentially gaslighting terms. This is rigging because it's intentional, it's calculated, it's an effort to swing results by controlling and manipulating and sort of molding who gets to vote easily versus who's going to have trouble voting. So a few things have to happen. First, we need as many nonprofit groups as possible to be armed and ready to fight every voter suppression attempt when they try to reduce polling places, cut early voting hours, put stricter guidelines for requesting an absentee ballot, purge voter rolls, as we've seen done in a number of different states. We need these nonprofit groups suing every single time and gumming up any of these attempts as much as possible. That's number one. Number two, anybody who can either vote early or vote absentee should plan to vote early and or vote absentee and should understand what the process looks like. Now, in some places, you will have access to both an absentee ballot, vote by mail, and early voting. You will have your choice of the two. In some places, it's one or the other, depending on the absentee ballot rules or the early voting rules. So inform yourself about what is going on where you vote. The absentee ballot you request from the state ahead of time. Some states are saying because of coronavirus, they'll send everybody an application for an absentee ballot. Others are looking at sending the ballots themselves. But the point is, the normal process is you request a ballot, you get it, you fill it out, you mail it in. That's it. You're done. Okay. Early voting is in-person voting. Depending on the state, sometimes about 3 weeks before the election day, in this case, November 3rd, early voting will start. It's usually limited locations. Like here in Boston, if I want to vote early, I can't vote in my neighborhood. I have to go to one of, I think it's like 5 or 6 locations, including City Hall, all the way downtown. Find out where that is. As many people as possible should take advantage of whichever method is available in their state and whatever is easier for you. Now, one last thing. The Georgia Secretary of State says there's going to be an investigation into what happened yesterday. Now, I really want you to understand how absurd this is. Brian Kemp was Secretary of State in November of 2018, and he ran the election in which he was a candidate for governor. And lo and behold, he won amidst allegations of voter suppression. Now, another Secretary of State is going to investigate voter suppression that he presided over to help his own party. It's a joke. We are a joke. I got a bunch of emails yesterday and today from European viewers saying, what's going on in the U.S. with your voting system? Like, how is this still a problem in one of the richest countries in the world? And the answer is, it's a problem by design. We could solve this, but there isn't a problem if you ask the people that benefit from this voter suppression. There are now calls. This is unbelievable. There are calls for the U.S. to bring in United Nations elections observers in November to try to ensure that there are fair elections in the United States. This is how unreliable and pathetic our election system is. And we're going to see a lot more of it as we get closer and closer to November. If you love feeding your intellectual curiosity, but you're always struggling to find the time, check out one of my all-time favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist lets you consume an entire book on your way home from work. They take thousands of popular nonfiction books, condense each one into text or audio that you can get through in just 15 minutes, and you get all of the important core ideas and information from that book. It's perfect if you don't have enough time to do all the reading you want to do, or if you just want to sample a book before you buy the entire thing. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.